the last picture that we had was two good engines. And about 30 seconds later, after that, it went blank. At that point, I knew that I had a severe engine damage. So Ed sitting in the back, during that 30 seconds of confusion, he said that maybe we had a mid-air collision.
So I want to take a few, obviously some time here to talk about 1175. And, obviously you were the captain in command at the time. And I want to hear the story from the flight deck. I'd be curious to know what happened and, what you guys did.
Absolutely. It was a great flight, very nice day out of San Francisco, 5 hours and 40 minutes. And the last 40 minutes is where the problem started. I had taken a bathroom break, sat in the cockpit seat, put my seatbelt on, just started going through the iPad to do the briefing for the approach into Honolulu, when all of a sudden there was a major explosion sound. Aircraft started shaking and rattling. Like when you fly in a jet and you're in unaccelerated flight, and ATC asks you to reduce your Mach number or reduce your speed, you bring the throttle back and you get a little push forward. And well, in this case, it was so severe, we almost hit the glare shield.
Wow.
And the most confusing thing was that, my eyes were looking at the engine instruments. As you know, these things are so big that, the wing is, 100 some feet behind us. You cannot see the engine. And after the explosion, the aircraft rolled to 45 degrees of bank at 36,000 feet. We were at 36,000, about 550 knots, and Mach 8.3. And what happened was she rolled to the right, and your muscle memory, you immediately go into recovery mode, right? So full left aileron. I keep going to the left aileron and left rudder, and soon I realized that I have to add more and more and more and more because she keeps rolling. And I basically ran out of aileron and rudder, and she was hesitating. So I asked Paul, my co-pilot, help me push the nose over. And we pushed the nose over, broke the angle of attack. So she turned around, came back. At the corner of my eyes, I'm looking at the airspeed. I had firewalled the engines. And I was looking at the airspeed. The airspeed drum was rolling back. And I knew, after all these years of experience of being a flight instructor and a check airman, which I have been a check airman on the 737 for 3 years, 15 years on the 756, and all the training I've done, and all the acrobatic flying that I've done, that the flight envelope is being compromised, and I have to do something now. So I already lowered the nose while we're trying to figure out what's going on. And the reason I say we try to figure out what's going on, Ryan, is that both engine instruments were indicating normal. At the time, we didn't know what the problem is. Why is she trying to roll? Why is she behaving so badly? And just to give your audience an example, so that maybe they can sense how severe the shaking in the cockpit was. If you were to be driving a semi-truck, an 18-wheeler, at 200 miles an hour over a railroad track with no shock absorber, that is the kind of feeling we had in the cockpit. It was very chaotic, a lot of noise, but both engine instruments were normal. And we didn't know this at the time, but later on we found out that the AECs, after the explosion, they got ripped off the airplane. So the message that AEC sends to the cockpit, the last picture that we had was two good engines. And about 30 seconds later, after that, it went blank. At that point, I knew that I have a severe engine damage. So we just went through the checklist, did the severe engine damage checklist, and then I asked for drift down. Paul told me the drift in altitude was 23,000 feet. We had already vacated 36,000. and the speed was 240 knots. So I started slowing the airplane down towards 240 knots. So, however, when I knew that, what's going on, and I really had to focus on flying the airplane. So I immediately delegated the communication with the ATC to Ed, and also told him to communicate with the flight attendant. So that was taken care of. I told Paul to run the checklist, and I just was fighting. I was really fighting to keep the blue side up and control the airplane and understand and learn from the airplane the way she was behaving. What is it that I'm supposed to be doing here? Because we had almost like 9 emergencies going on at the same time. And, I went back to my basic flying skills, which is aviate, navigate, and then communicate. So I was just flying the airplane, and we were 200 miles from Honolulu. And I knew that I have to kind of baby this thing all the way to, from 36,000 feet to land in Honolulu, which was the nearest airport at the time. Plus, I've been going there for 35 years. I was very comfortable with it. And so that's initially what happened. There was a lot of confusion in the cockpit. 30 seconds later, after the explosion, we realized that we lost the right engine. And as I went through the drift down, as I'm descending, vacating 360 for 230, we entered the clouds at 33,000 feet. And as I'm slowing the airplane towards the drift down, she starts shaking and, stalling on us. So how do you recover from a stall? Max thrust. I'm already at max thrust. You lower the nose to get out of the stall. So I lowered the nose, and now here we are coming down like 4,000 feet per minute down. And all I could see is that, there is Honolulu here, and we're coming down, and Honolulu's going up. So we were not going to make it. So at that time, I realized that I need to create a new envelope in my own head, find a sweet spot that this airplane is flyable. Because at Mach 8.3, we were doing 265 knots indicated, and she was literally falling apart. Literally. I mean, we didn't really think, we didn't know the extent of the damage. We just thought she's going to come apart. So now, of course, the checklist says, you got to go to a lower airspeed, but that lower airspeed didn't work either, because at that speed, we would stall because the right wing was, afterwards, we realized that the reason that speed wasn't good because the right wing was compromised. So I created a new envelope in my own head between 245 and 250, and I kept it there. And that basically gave me 1,000 to 1,200 feet per minute down, and in that envelope. And, in my head, again, I went back to old school, altitude, airspeed, distance, because the autopilot was gone, TAC was gone, the auto throttle was gone, ACARS was gone. And so I just basically asked Ed, give me direct to Honolulu, and I just started descending between 1,000 to 1,200 feet per minute, IMC, hand flown towards Honolulu Airport.
Wow. So Paul was your FO, and then Ed was in the jump seat, right?
So that's an interesting thing.
Yeah.
Paul wasn't based in San Francisco. He was based in Dulles, IAD. And he had TDY to San Francisco just to fly to Hawaii. And this was his second trip to Honolulu. So when it happened. And on the other hand, Ed, our OMC, or the jump seater, he is from Honolulu, and he joined us in the cockpit because all the seats in the back were full. So having the third pilot really made a big difference.
And he was 777 type rated too, right? He was just coming back from training. Is that right?
He finished 777 IOE that morning.
Wow.
Yeah.
What are the odds?
After a few months and almost a year, I came up with what I call the 5 stars that lined up that day for us in order to make that successful landing. We can talk about that later, but Ed definitely had a big part in the whole thing by being there. It literally became a 3-man cockpit.
So Ed, from the other stories I've read and about this incident, you sent him back to the cabin, right, to inspect the damage. Did he come back to the flight deck with a ghostly look on his face when he saw the engine?
Well, I never looked back, but because I was
yeah, you were probably pretty focused.
He was not behaving well at all. So the video, the 14-second video that you see that the engine is shaking and the whole wing is shaking and the side of the airplane is shaking, that is actually 15 minutes after we shut it down.
Wow.
And that vibration, and that stayed with us all the way to landing. So I would say that on a scale of 1 to 10, initially it was like 15. And literally we had to shout from top of our lungs to be able to communicate.
Even with the headset on?
Yeah.
Wow.
It was just really loud. And then the starter factor, initially is like, here I am, I got full cross control. We have 2 good engines in front of us. We don't know what's going on. So I asked Paul and Ed, guys, I'm having a hard time controlling this jet. Tell me what's going on. And Paul says, I don't know. Both engines are normal. So I thought maybe a part of the wing or maybe an aileron came off or a part of the stabilizer just let go, at 550 knots. And because, even though I had trimmed the airplane, I really had hard time. I had my left hand on the yoke and right hand max thrust. And it's like we're descending with max thrust on a 90,000 horsepower engine. It just doesn't make sense. Nothing was making sense. I just had to feel it and make sure that, we got to keep the blue side up. We have forward momentum, but I have to control the rate of descent so we can make to Honolulu. So Ed sitting in the back, during that 30 second of confusion, he said that maybe we had a mid-air collision. But then again, as a professional pilot, I'm looking at my PFD and ND, and we do have TCAS that would do collision avoidance or a message. And I said there is no intruder up here. We didn't have anything. So this little discussion, the shock, the startle factor happened within the first 30 seconds, but we had positive control of the aircraft already. I didn't let it go. Even though I do acrobatic and I do roll this airplane in the simulator, I always do that. Just, I always go extra mile. I always do the things that, I just don't go for the check ride that says, get it done and go home. Now, I always want to do some extra stuff. And 2 things that I always do in every single airplane. I ask the, instructor after we're done, put me like 10 miles out, 5,000 feet, shut everything down. And I glide the baby, that jet, a touchdown in San Francisco. I've never missed. I just said, shut everything down, take all the engines, instruments, everything away, not even a rat. And I just bring it down. I land at higher airspeed, but we make it.
Wow.
The other thing I always do is that I roll the 777, 1 turn to the right at 360, and I do a barrel roll to the left. So when this happened and she was sitting there about 45 degrees, maybe it was 1 second or 2 seconds, but to me, felt like forever, right? I thought maybe I'd do a barrel roll, but because of the shaking and vibration, I was afraid that she might not come through the roll. And at the time, we didn't know, but actually one of the blades separated from the engine and hit the fuselage. But it hit the stringers, just the ribs, and bounced back. And later on, they told me, Captain, if this thing had come through the window, it would have been probably another Southwest story, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Or if it had hit 4 or 5 inches in front of the stringers, you would have a rapid D on top of that, depressurization, that is, right? And then our checklist says, you descend the airplane immediately to 10,000 feet. If you had done that 200 miles out, I could not drag her for 200 miles at 10,000 feet because she was not maintaining altitude. So, I literally was out of the picture because it really was a handful. So I had my left hand on the yoke. I had my right hand on the throttle, and that's it. I mean, that's where I belonged at that time for 40 minutes. Every single fiber of my being was focused on flying that airplane and making sure that, I have total control over everything. And I remember, as a matter of fact, at 10,000 feet, Ed got out of his seat and came and put my shoulder harness on me. I wasn't even going to take my hand off to do that, because we tried to re-engage the autopilot 3 times.
I was going to ask you that, actually. It didn't work.
Yeah, it just wouldn't. I mean, the impact was so severe that the autopilot, whatever is going on in the computer's head, it just got dislodged to whatever, and it wasn't going to reconnect. I mean, I really had trimmed the airplane that I could literally, if I were to take my hands off, she probably would have just flown, But so there was no pressure on the controls. But every time we tried to engage the autopilot, it just wouldn't. And as a matter of fact, one of the things the FAA said is like, Captain, we noticed the oxygen masks were deployed. Why did you do that if you didn't have a rapid depressurization? I said, sir, we didn't do that. The impact was so severe up there that launched the oxygen mask. Like if you do that on a hard landing,
Yeah.
They just fall. And we didn't do it. It just happened. And as a matter of fact, when they took the information out of the flight data recorder and programmed it into the computer to duplicate it in the simulator, because I was really hoping that there'd be a scenario that the guys would practice just in case this unthinkable ever happens again. They said, Captain, we tried that. It would rip the sim off the ground. So severe that they couldn't practice it. Therefore, I came up with that animation that I have created that has been distributed to a lot of airlines. And as a matter of fact, when the second engine failure happened in Denver last year, the captain of that had seen my animation video, and he kind of went through the simulation of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So knew what we had experienced, so what to expect, which was really a good thing.
Absolutely. So using 1175 as a frame of reference, do you think we're trading in airmanship for automation here in the United States?
I am truly a believer that you need at least 2 pilots in the cockpit. In our case, just like Sioux City, Iowa, the third man did make a big difference. As a matter of fact, I made sure that it ended up going to Washington, D.C. for the Superior Airmanship Award, because without his help, it would have been a different story.
That's
because
right.
we get a lot of our information through ACARS from dispatch for landing and all of that. And, ACARS was even out. So he just fired up his iPad and gave me the distance, for the rolling on down the runway. I believe it was 7,690 feet or 960 feet. And what made things a little bit more challenging in our case was that, I've been going to Honolulu for 35 years.
Wow.
And that day, it was overcast. We went IMC from 33,000 feet to about 2,000 feet.
Wow.
And runway 8 left was closed. 4 right was too short. And we had to do a non-precision RNAV approach to 8 right. And
wow.
After all of that. So
that's only adds fuel to the fire, right?
Yes,
that's crazy.
Yes.
Wow. Yeah, it's interesting you say that, and as a recipient of the Superior Airman Award, I'm sure, just like in the Sioux City, Iowa incident, having that third person is very important. So
very important. It just he was able to communicate with ATC. I didn't have to do any of that. And fortunately for us, he was a United pilot, so he understood our procedures.
Yeah.
And, when I told him, to take it to the flight attendants, he went back there, took care of everybody. And the fact that he was able to go back there, I told him, go back with your iPad. If you see anything please let me know what's going on so I can at least get a better understanding of what's happening to my ship and to the jet. And when he came back and showed me, the engine cowling gone, and it just like, I mean, you can only imagine how much drag that creates
Oh, absolutely.
at 36,000 feet on Mach 8.3. And she literally, I mean, the fact that I tell the guys that we had max thrust on the left engine just to maintain 1,200 feet per minute descent, they shake their heads. They can't believe it.
Mhm.
And so if you don't mind, I'm going to tell you about those 5 stars.
Yes. I was going to ask you.
Yeah. So basically, you become, like a Monday night quarterback, trying to think what happened on Sunday's game. More and more I thought about it, and more came out from NTSB and FAA, because as I told you, we didn't even know the blade has separated and hit the fuselage. A few months later, I basically, after analyzing everything in my head, I came up with this, what I call the 5 stars that lined up that day for us to make this successful landing and save people's lives. Number 1 was that 3 minutes before this happened, I was taking a bathroom break. I wasn't even in the cockpit.
Wow.
I came and sat in the cockpit seat, put my seatbelt on, started doing the briefing when, boom, it just exploded. Number 2 was that we had a 777 trained pilot in the cockpit. Ed just finished check ride on the 777 that morning. He became extremely instrumental to the success of that mission. Number 3 was that we were only 40 minutes out and 200 miles. After they fed the flight data recorded information to the computer, they said that from United side, they said, Captain, if you were like hour out or 300 or 400 miles out, it would have been a controlled descent to the water with full thrust because she was not flyable. Mm-hmm. So that was number 3. Number 4 was that a blade came off and hit the fuselage, but hit the stringers and didn't penetrate the fuselage, because there were big concerns. If that had happened and it would cut the fuselage, and with all that shaking going on, rattling going on, she might have come apart midair. Because the second time I sent Ed back there to look at, tell me if everything's okay, he said, Captain, I went to midship and I was looking at the aft galley. It was shaking so much, it's blurry. It literally is blurry. And that was something else. And number 5 star, Ryan, was that over 1,000 pounds of material came off that airplane at over 500 knots, and not a single one hit the tail.
Wow.
Even 10 pounds at 500 knots could have been like shooting the tail with a cannonball at 5,000 PSI. It would have done serious damage. So, and I think the man upstairs had a lot to do with it too.
Oh, yeah.
So I mean, it wasn't our time that day. And I always say the quality of our life is the quality of decisions we make in life. That 35 seconds, my whole life went in front of me like slow motion. And I had a dad who was extremely sick. And I told myself that not today. Today's not going to be the day we die. I have not said my goodbyes, and I have some unfinished business. So that one decision that today is not it, I think had a big influence on everything else that happened that day.
Absolutely.
And I was able to go see my dad and say goodbye. 2 months later, he passed away.
Incredible. That's awesome. Well, I really appreciate the time, and amazing interview, amazing background on just the story. I mean, it's one thing to read about it, read about the incident, but it's another thing to hear the actual pilot in command. So that was really cool. So I really appreciate your time, Captain, and thanks for taking the time to speak with me.
I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to reach out to a lot of people out there by hearing the true story. And I wanted to say something that the NTSB, a gentleman, told us that, Captain, you have no idea what a pleasure it is to talk to a live pilot rather than picking up the pieces from bottom of the ocean and trying to figure out what happened.
Absolutely.
So they were very grateful for that. And I'm putting a lot of stuff on YouTube and on social media, Captain Behnam Official on Instagram and YouTube. So if your viewers want to get some more information, there's a lot of videos and a lot of interviews being put out there. And there is a book coming out, hopefully within the next 3 months or so. I'll make sure I get in touch with you and send you a copy.
Absolutely. I'd love to read it. Well, thank you, Captain. And definitely going to check you out on those platforms too. Your story is incredible.
Well, thank you for having me on your program. I really appreciate it, and look forward to chat with you or maybe run into you one of these days.
Absolutely.